Tomorrow's a big day in the Elizabeth Holmes case. Why? Because the judge is going to hear her motion for judgment of acquittal. In other words, she's asking the judge to throw out the jury's verdicts. So, in this video, I'm going to talk to you about what typically happens at this hearing, what her reasons are. What reasons does she want the judge? Why does she want the judge to throw out these verdicts? And what the likely outcome is. I'll give you my analysis. Do I think the judge is going to grant the motion for an acquittal and throw out the jury's verdict? Or do I think the judge is going to deny her motion? And I want to know what you think. Do you think the judge will deny or grant it? Okay, so please do support my work by subscribing. So hit that subscribe button. And thank you to all of those of you who have subscribed. And welcome to all of you new subscribers. Thank you for joining our community of analyzers. And please hit that like button, share these videos, hit the bell notification, and please do leave a comment because I want to know what your analysis is. All right, so in case I didn't say it, these videos are for education information. All right, so what happened, in case you popped onto this channel, in January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted of 4 counts of wire fraud. 1 count relating to conspiring with Sunny Balwani, who was the CEO of Theranos. She was the CEO of Theranos. 1 count of conspiring to defraud investors with Balwani, and then 3 counts of defrauding individual investors. There were 4 other counts relating to patients. 1 relating to conspiring to defraud patients. She was found not guilty of. The other counts relating to the patients, she was also found not guilty of. And then the 3 remaining individual investor counts, the jury was undecided. So those counts are still out there. And typically what happens is at sentencing, the process, depending on what the sentence is and whatever agreements there are, the prosecution, the government typically dismisses those counts, but they may not. We'll have to see what happens. So let me give you a little bit of information regarding this, what I call an acquittal motion, where Elizabeth Holmes is asking the judge to basically overrule the jury's verdict, to throw it out, and to acquit her of all of these charges. Okay, so these motions are commonly made. So it's not an unusual motion. It's commonly made, but when the defendant is convicted, they typically make these motions for judgment of acquittal. And they do it because they want to test the evidence. They want to get the judge to basically weigh in, the judge to make a call as to whether or not there was sufficient evidence to support each one of these convictions. Okay, so how does the judge decide that? Well, the judge decides that by looking at the arguments made by both sides, listening to the arguments at the hearing tomorrow, looking at what the case law is, looking at the record, and the record is the witness's testimony and the evidence at trial. There's not going to be any additional witnesses called at this hearing tomorrow. There's not going to be any additional evidence. He's solely, the judge, and any judge in this type of motion, a Rule 29 motion, makes their decision based on the record, based on the trial. Okay? So if you think about, if you were to do, and they did, a transcript, a court reporter did a transcript of the whole trial, that would include the exhibits and all the testimony. That's basically the record. And by the way, that's the record that the appellate court will also be reviewing to determine if she files an appeal, and every defendant has a right to appeal their convictions. I'm sure she's going to file an appeal. The Court of Appeal will be looking at that entire record, okay, to decide whether or not there's basis or any reasons to overthrow or to invalidate the convictions, okay? I'll get into the whole process of a Court of Appeal later. All right, so anyway, these are common motions, and it's testing the evidence. And so what is the standard that the judge applies? And by the way, I did a more in-depth video on this. I did a live analysis of the motion, so you can take a look at that. This is meant to be just a quick highlights to get prepared for tomorrow. Okay, so the judge, the test is no rational juror could have found the elements of wire fraud beyond a reasonable doubt based on the record. All right? So, no rational juror, based on the testimony that they heard, that we heard over the months of trial, the evidence that they took a look at, no rational juror could find the elements beyond a reasonable doubt based on that record. And that's it. That's what the judge has to decide. So basically, they're arguing, the defense, Elizabeth Holmes is arguing, that the jury speculated. But the other side of that is the jury's entitled to make a reasonable inference based on the evidence. Okay, so I'm going to get into what are the reasons why. The reasons why she wants the judge to throw out the verdicts. Well, and this is just a highlight. Again, go back and look at the live analysis video I did for more in-depth analysis and highlights. Okay, so they're arguing that there's no evidence that there was a conspiratorial agreement between Balwani and Holmes. They're also saying that the government failed to show that Elizabeth Holmes knew her conduct was unlawful. They're also saying that the frequency of communication. You remember all those texts, all those videos I did in the Balwani case about the text between Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani, and you can take a look at those. They're saying that even though there were frequent communications, the defense is alleging here, or stating, I should say, and even though Balwani and Elizabeth, there was a text regarding joint ownership of responsibility for the decisions of the company, the defense is saying that's still not enough. That doesn't prove an agreement between the two of them in order to make a conspiracy, because a conspiracy is an agreement between two or more people to commit a crime, basically, okay? And so they're also saying that the motive, and the government has argued in the case that she needed the money, right? So that's why she was out there making those alleged misrepresentations, okay? And so the defense is saying the motive isn't enough. That doesn't support a conviction for a conspiracy or for defrauding investors. So, again, consider the judge just looks at what happened at the trial, looks at the case law, looks at the arguments in the motion and the response to the motion that have been filed, as well as the arguments at the hearing tomorrow. And then the judge will make a decision. The judge could make a decision at the time of the hearing or issue a written opinion later. So we'll see. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so what else in particular? The defense is saying there's insufficient evidence. The government didn't meet its burden of proof regarding the statements that Elizabeth made regarding the capability of the analyzer. In other words, they're arguing, the defense is arguing, that her statements were relating to the 4.0 series analyzer, not relating to what was happening in the lab operations. Therefore, the testimony of Erica Chung isn't really relevant, I think is what they're trying to argue here. But what about the scatter plots from Tyler Schultz to Elizabeth Holmes, telling her about, what the variance, the problems that they were having with the testing? You can go ahead and take a look at that when I think I did a video where Tyler calls out Elizabeth Holmes. They're also saying the evidence regarding the financial stability of the company. The government didn't provide enough evidence for that either. And there's no evidence to show that Elizabeth Holmes knew that they were generating modest revenues, not the billions or the hundreds of millions that was allegedly said as far as the financial revenues that Theranos was making. Regarding the Walgreens partnership, the allegation by the government that it stalled out, yet representations were made otherwise, in other words, fraud. The defense is arguing it didn't stall out, and there's, in fact, Walgreens did continue to open up the wellness centers, and there's no evidence that Elizabeth Holmes knew that Walgreens modified their goal. They changed their strategy as to how many stores they were opening. Then the argument regarding, these are all the allegations that the government alleged in the indictment to prove that there was fraud, that there were misrepresentations made. So the allegation regarding whether or not the technology was deployed in the battlefield. Well, the defense says, Well, that's not true either, because there was a deployment of the technology in several continents. Therefore, I think they're arguing there was no fraud there in the representations that were made. Then there was another argument regarding using third-party analyzers and whether or not they told the investors about that. The defense again says that there was the investors knew, or I think should have known, because it was on the website, it was in a press release, that they were using third-party analyzers, and the investors should know that because of trade secret reasons, they couldn't divulge all the information. I think that's what the defense is arguing. They also argue, which I think is interesting, and I think this is going to be very interesting on appeal. It's the term of prejudicial variance, and I talked about this in the live analysis video, so please do take a look at that. So what the defense is arguing, and I think it's a pretty creative argument, and I think some of these arguments that they're making may be good points, but I don't know if they're going to be successful here. All right, because basically, did the jury speculate? When you're standing in front of a jury making a closing argument, when you're on the defense, basically you're going to be arguing that the government is speculating that there's fraud here. There isn't sufficient evidence. They didn't meet their burden, all of that, okay? So the prejudicial variance, meaning what that means is that the allegations in the indictment that the government made, they modified third-party devices, they didn't tell them, their investors or the patients they were using third-party devices. They represented, or Elizabeth Holmes represented, allegedly that the company was financially stable, that they deployed the technology, that they had a profitable revenue with the Department of Defense, that the technology had been validated by research and pharmaceutical companies. And by the way, they're also arguing that there was no research witness. So there was no testimony in the government's case by anybody in the research community to say whether or not they validated the technology. So I don't know if that's a fair point or not. We're going to find out. Okay, so based on all of those allegations, and you can look at the video I did on the indictment where I walk you through all the allegations, the defense is now arguing that basically the government deviated from those allegations, okay? Therefore, Elizabeth Holmes was prejudiced. She wasn't put on notice that they were going to be arguing or presenting evidence different at trial. So let me give you an example. One of the things that the defense argues is that regarding the allegation that no research institution or pharmaceutical company validated, examined the technology, the defense is arguing that evidence that was presented at trial was just a slide that says it was comprehensively validated, I think is what it said. And the defense is saying, well, that's not enough, and that's not putting Elizabeth on notice, because you said, they alleged that it was pharmaceutical and research, not comprehensively validated. And therefore, because they varied from the allegations or deviated from the allegations in their case, in the government's case, Elizabeth Holmes was prejudiced by that. And based on that, the judge and potentially the Court of Appeal could throw out these convictions. I think that's what they're arguing. Okay, so I hope that was a short enough summary. And again, you can go ahead and take a look at the live analysis video I did of the motion if you want some more in-depth, and if you want to look at the motion too. So what do I think the likely outcome is going to be tomorrow? I think, based on the evidence that I saw at the trial, I watched the trial, I think the judge is going to deny, and will deny this motion for judgment of acquittal. And typically judges do deny. These are difficult to win, okay? But it has happened. The judge has thrown out jury verdicts, and if you look at the live analysis video, I do talk about it has happened in the Ninth Circuit, and it has happened in federal court, which this case was in federal court, and other federal courts too. So it's up to this judge. It's in his discretion as to whether or not he grants or denies this acquittal motion. And if he grants it, that's it. Her, her verdict, the judge will enter an acquittal and throw out the jury's verdict. If it's denied, she can go ahead and proceed to appeal her case. And we may find out some interesting things in the hearing tomorrow as to potential additional grounds or arguments or evidence. You never know what happens in these motions. That could be part of the appeal, part of a grounds for one of the appeals or more than one of the appeals. We'll have to find that out. Okay, so what do you think? Do you think the judge is going to grant her request for an acquittal and throw out the jury's verdict? I mean, judges are very reluctant to do it. Do you think the jury made their decision based on speculation? Do you think they made reasonable inference? What do you think? Or do you think the judge is going to deny this motion? So please do let me know. Please leave a comment or question. I want to know what your analysis is. Thank you very much for watching, and please do subscribe, hit that like button, share these videos, hit the bell notification. And if you want to support, you find value in these videos and the content that I am providing, you can go ahead and support these videos. I'll put a PayPal link in the description box below the video. Thank you very much for watching, and do subscribe.